people need information to buy. So you got information, like you read a description, you listen to YouTube videos, whatever, Google review, Google stuff. And then you know what happens when you're looking for reviews on Google and stuff like that?
Yeah.
That's the experience part. And what most people don't realize is experience is part of information. And so experience, when it comes to marketing, then we figure out how do we transfer this experience into the product, into the marketing, right? So do we give them templates, checklists, etc. And why do people need experience? They need people to decide for them. And that's why we hide the sales process.
This episode is for you if you want to deeply understand human psychology, why people buy, why they don't buy, how to sell to women, how much people will spend on an offer, how to calculate maximum lifetime value, how to craft an offer with staying power, and so much more. So welcome to the Joyous Path to Millions podcast with me, your host, Emily June Wilcox. I'm a serial entrepreneur, 7-figure business owner, #1 bestselling author, the creator of the Money Wound Healing Movement. I'm a devoted mama of 2. I love country music. I love crystals. I'm living life in sunny Southern California. And I'm on a mission to put more money in the hands of soulpreneurs through healing money wounds, building abundant businesses, balancing masculine and feminine energy. And I know that when we do this, we collectively uplevel the planet, we change the frequency, and we help usher in new paradigm wealth. So I am honored to be walking the joyous path to millions together. And today I invited an incredible guest. I've been looking forward to this interview for weeks. His name is Alen Sultanic. You'll see as we dive into the interview, he's an OG in direct response marketing, but he's just an incredible human, very thoughtful, very deep thinking, an interesting balance of masculine, feminine energy, like that intuitive and mystic side of him. And then the part that can then add strategy and logic on top of the intuition. It's a fascinating conversation. I don't even want to give anything away, but Alen was very generous with his time. He made some incredible predictions about the future of sales and where the market is going. So without further ado, let's dive in. I'm super excited to have you here and have this conversation. And of course, we'll get into who you are and all the things, but I just have to say my ebook funnel is absolutely crushing it. And it's totally thanks to you. And there's a funny backstory because I was like brand new to your free Facebook group. Maria Went mentioned your name and I was like, all right, who is this dude? And then I like followed you on Facebook and you had a few posts that were really interesting and they didn't feel bro marketing to me, which felt so refreshing and great. And so then I joined your free Facebook group and not really knowing anything about your body of work, I posted in there at one point, hey, I published a book like 2 months ago. Does anybody have any suggestions on good ways to drive traffic? Mm-hmm. And a bunch of people were like, automatic clients is basically a book funnel. And I'm like, what's automatic clients? And they're like, okay. And so actually, basically somebody was like, look, it's Alan's thing, but it's not even for sale. And somebody slid into my DMs and was like, look, here's a PDF of the book. Don't share it with anybody else. And so then, yeah. So I haven't even paid you like 1 cent. I read the whole book. I'm like, this is fantastic. Of course, I already had a really great book. So the only thing I was missing were the funnel pages. And I just set about to write the longest landing page of my life and got the whole thing up. And it's just been like an absolute game changer. It's scaling like a dream. And first off, thank you. And second of all, I think there's something really special about what you've cultivated in this free Facebook group. The culture is unlike any place else. And I would love for you to speak to that because, of course, with school and everything else, everyone's talking about community, but very few people are actually cultivating great communities that people want to be in and where people just are naturally championing the work. And somehow you've done that.
Yeah. It's a funny story, the whole like getting the ebook for free. There's a very famous marketer in our industry and I'm good friends with the guy now. In 2010, I think I did a course. Most of my work in marketing hasn't been in my name. It's been like pen names and offers. Like I like to be in the shadows of marketing, and that's where I do my best work until recently. And anyway, one of the courses I released some years ago was on affiliate marketing because I was really big into that. And so this guy, I'm not going to mention name, but if he listens to this podcast, he'll know who he is. This was some years ago. I didn't know him. He hits me up out of the blue. Can't remember if it was Skype or Facebook, but he's, hey man, I'm like, what's up, dude? Nice to meet you. He's good. I just want to thank you. I just made my first 6 figures with your course. And I'm like, oh, that's wonderful. That's great. Glad to hear it. I'm like, what's your email? I'd like to look you up as a customer or whatever. And I stole it. I couldn't afford it because it was like $500.
Oh my gosh.
Some years later, I felt somewhat bad. So he sent me like $5,000 here, $1,000 as a thank you. I'm like, cool. But yeah, so that happens a little too often.
Hey guys, I'm here. I wanted to add a little bit of context to this piece of the conversation. So when I was given a free copy of the Automatic Client book, my understanding was that this was an offer that was not available any longer. After Alen and I stopped recording, he shared that he does open Automatic Clients for people to get the book like a few times a year by request. So if you're inside of the free Nothing Held Back Facebook group, pay attention and you'll have opportunities to get this book. Otherwise, if you join his NHB Plus community, you get everything that's included in the book, plus all of the template upsells, plus so much more, including live coaching. So I just want to be so clear. I just joined the NHB Plus community. I really believe in paying people for their work. I believe in the law of reciprocity. And I highly encourage you to do the same. Make sure that you're in a fair, energetic exchange with anything that you receive. Okay, back to the interview.
But yeah, as far as the community goes, just the philosophy of the approach and the approach. I've been in this game for a very long time. And I remember what it was like to come in forever ago and just be alone and be lost.
Yeah.
And just not know where to turn, who to ask for help, who to trust, who had my best interest in heart. The industry back then was much smaller, much more intimate, much more helpful, caring, warmer. Mm-hmm. And I call it having magic in the game. Like it was magical. Yeah. And to me, it was like, when I first found this, I was like, this is the greatest thing ever. I get to be on the computer. I can put words together, things together. I can put it online and strangers can buy stuff and I can make some money. And maybe one day I'll be rich. All these things were like, wow, like possibility of dreams. And the industry back then had that warmth to it. And then as I grew, whatever, like everybody wants to do this, right? Obviously, because who wouldn't? You're in this magical land where anything is possible. And then more and more people came in and then launches happened, whatever. And it became very transactional in nature. And I went on my way and I did a bunch of stuff. And then I think in 2018, because I had an ad network, I sold it. I did a lot of stuff, SaaS, like ton of offers and webinars, high ticket, low ticket, mid ticket, you name it. And so the only 2 things I never really dabbled in were like eBay and porn. Like pretty much everything else I had my hand in. In 2018, came back and it was like all these people, you look at Facebook profiles, I help. I'm like, this is wonderful. The magic is here. And then everybody you talk to, it's 5 minutes later in the conversation, it's, here's a link to my course. I'm like, what? I mean, because I story of people that go to Bali. They go to Bali, you meet some friends and they're selling their yoga classes and you meet some other friends, they're selling you their retreats. So everybody's selling everybody everything. And I was like, then I started poking around different groups, whatnot. And I was like, wait a minute, this isn't what it was. This is something very different. It's under the guise. Because if you look at every argument for war or anything nefarious, it tends to be always under the guise of morality for the greater good. And oftentimes it's not at its heart once you dig into it. So we're doing this live free thing, boom, so long as you buy. We got this event, so long as you buy. You join this free group, then it's like 15 people in your DMs. And I was like, where's the magic? Because this generation of marketers hasn't experienced what I've experienced, that warmth. And so I looked around and there's all these like wonderful people from Nigeria, Pakistan, Western Europe, even like a lot of poor people from the UK, North America, South America. They all want to do this. And every way they turn, it's people just want to jump in their wallets. I was like, I don't like this. So I was like, let's start it. And then a good friend of mine, Keith Baxter, had a name called Nothing Held Back. That was his original thing. And it was like, I'm very nostalgic, right? So I tend to be a collector of marketing nostalgia. So I have this huge memory bank of a million offers, like names, things that happened. So I can just reference and crisscross. So one of them, and when these things that are very nostalgic come around, I tend to buy them. So I own a bunch of domains that were like things that I loved on the internet. So I just went and bought them. And so I'm a collector of those things. And so Nothing Held Back was, Keith wasn't doing anything. He went into his family's insurance business. And I hit him up and I'm like, hey, do you still have Nothing Held Back domain? He's like, yeah. I'm like, I'd like to buy it from you. And I did. So we made a deal. I bought it. And we had automatic clients running at the time. And we had the automatic clients group and it was doing well. But I didn't want to mingle it because that was like with the intention of making money. And I'm like, I wanted purity. And so we started this thing. Well, I started it. And I just was like, I want to create a place where I want to participate. I don't want to be pitched. I don't want to be asked to go on list. I don't want to be DM'd. I want good stuff. And then, and ultimately the rules were simple. It's like offer value, don't pitch, because we don't even pitch our stuff, right? Like we don't pitch. If people ask to buy, they buy, whatever, but we don't pitch. We create value. And then, from there, it just kept growing and people felt that energy. And then it grew into something special. And then out of that, I've had membership sites in the past that had 5,000 people or more in them. And I'm used to building platforms for communities. And so when we first started it, it was like, let's build a platform around this. And so what are we building? I'm like, what do I want to be part of? So we're almost ready with that. And then it's basically, we created, for lack of a better word, like a Disneyland for marketers, where it's like you can come and it's all the dreams can come true. And so we have everything you can imagine. So we took the money we generated from NHB and reinvested. So our philosophy, it's interesting, right? Because it's like in this industry, everybody comes in to get rich, which is nothing wrong with it. But in that process of getting rich, they forget to enrich others. And so it's, wait a minute, you forgot the people that made you rich. You didn't really enrich them. And that's why a lot of times we have these gurus come up and they leave. They come up and they leave. They get their fair share, but the people didn't. And so it was all about, philosophically speaking, reinvesting back into the industry. And so as far as I know, I think also Go High Level as a company does that. They reinvest quite heavily in some other companies, but like we are very heavy into that, like every thought. And so we have a number of big projects we're about to release. They're just free. And so like, how can we reinvest back? And then out of that, we created something special. But then if you look at a lot of other communities, I get people ask, like every other day, I get somebody DMing me, asking me like, hey, we'll give you this commission if you promote this. We'll pay you if you promote this. We'll do this if you do this. I'm like, no. But I tell them, I'm like, look, if your product is good, we'll just mention it for free. We don't need a commission as long as it helps people. And that's the arrangement we have. But a lot of the other communities are created with the intentionality of money, right? Transactions. So for example, like some platforms you join, the courses are locked because on video number 5, it's going to be a pitch. And it's all this pretend care. It's not authentic care. And authentic care is, will you do something without expecting anything in return? Transactional care is, I do it to the point where I'm getting something back. If we don't get something back, then I don't do it. So like with NHB, we operate, I think, for a year or two before we even opened up anything. Long time. So that's kind of where it comes from.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. And it does feel so different. And in a lot of the spaces that I'm in, I would say that it's almost the reverse of what you're talking about, where the guru is making all the money but doesn't care about the people. Really, it's like very transactional. And I feel like I'm in so many spaces where it's mainly women entrepreneurs. They are often, whether they would call themselves this or not, are healers. And they're just like very tapped into energy, very empathic, doing incredible work, and aren't wealthy enough. Like they're not making enough money because they haven't really cracked the whole sales and marketing thing. And so they're doing okay. But I think they maybe see the bad parts of more of a true, I don't know, like digital marketing funnels and that kind of thing. And so then they stay away from it. And those are the people you really, I think, would want using these kinds of tools to spread their impact and spread their work. And I'm curious if you have any thoughts on like how to bridge that gap so that we get like the really high caring people and the people that have incredible impact using the kinds of tools that are necessary in order to do that.
Yeah. One other thing that was really a big focus for me is I used to go to events a lot. And like, truth be told, is I never really sat there and listened to anybody talk. It was mostly just to go hang out at bars and drink. Because that's where all the killers of marketing are. The real players, they're at the bar getting drunk because they don't need to go listen to some guy they're better than on stage.
Yeah.
So we never went on to events to go listen to anybody. We just went to meet up with various people and drink and had a good time. And to me, if I look at the space, equality is like a huge value of mine. So I don't really view anybody as better than anybody else in terms of their status or how much money they have. And there's a lot of that flexing going on in our space. Like, oh, I have more money than you, therefore I'm better than you. I have this.
Yeah.
No, you're not. And so a big philosophy for me is to really celebrate the underdogs, right? Because what I noticed is as I got to know a lot of these, as I gained some status and fame in this space, you're going to call it that, I've had a lot of these guys try to befriend me, right? And I'm like, look, I'm okay being friends with you as much as I am with just a regular person from Pakistan or something. You're just a human being to me. And what I realized, a lot of the guys that are doing really well, they do really well despite themselves. And it's because they have this incredible talent behind them. And then so for me with NHB, it's okay. If these guys, these underdogs are the reason this person's doing well, why are we not celebrating these people, and then empowering them and showing the world how great they are? So with the NHB platform, we have a lot of coaches and mentors now coming in. And I have a lot of the big heavy hitting names or whatnot. Hey, can I be part of it? Whatnot. I'm like, I don't mind. They're great. But we prefer the people who are in the weeds, in the trenches every day, doing it, working, making it happen. The real stars behind the show. And so I think with a lot of that, that's really important. And I feel like a lot of people feel like the underdogs in the game, but they don't realize it's like most of them are the reason a lot of these guys do well. And I mentored many of them. Like I mentor in Fast Forward Entry Plus, some of the CMOs and CROs and copywriters, some of the biggest names in the world. And they come to me like, hey, we got to make this work. We got to make this work. And we do. But as far as women go and how to do it, I'll tell you something. Like, so when I first got into this game, you discover it. And like back then it was like you introduce this, new world, and there's this new terminology, and terminology ads, copywriting. When you get into it, is copywriting like the trademark copyright, the little C with the
right.
C? Or is it like, what is it? You don't know. So I started looking at copywriting, and I asked myself a very simple question. It was like, okay, like out of all the skills I can learn, what's the one that has the highest leverage? And one thing that really resonated with me was salesmanship in print. So it's obviously that whole saying, marketing, salesmanship in print. I don't know if you know the story of Johnny Kennedy coming down and terming that. Yeah. So like back in the day, there were advertising, early 1900s, reminiscent of what we're doing here, internet still being somewhat of a Wild West. And there was these agencies now, and nobody knew what advertising was. And then there was a park ranger called Johnny Kennedy up in, I believe, Canada. And he came down to New York to the lobby of this agency. Now, I can't remember. I can Google it. But if you Google it, you can see this story. I can't remember the name of it. But he basically wrote a letter, says, I know you've been looking for what advertising is and you don't know. Let's have lunch. So they had lunch. And basically the guy just wrote, it's salesmanship in print multiplied. And then from there, there was the birth of copywriting. And out of that piece of history, some of the biggest brands were created. And then a gentleman by the name of Rosser Reeves came about in the 1950s when TV started becoming. And so that was their version of YouTube video ads. And that took off, and they had to condense it because people want to watch a TV show. So you got to have a 3-minute ad. And so that took off, and the long stuff got long forgotten until Gary Halbert started going to the Library of Congress and trying to figure out how it works. And he found the Robert Collier letter book and all these things. If it wasn't for Gary, I don't know where most of us would be, honestly. So I'm forever grateful. And there's their nostalgia coming back. But in this journey of direct response, I grew up in it. And then when you meet a lot of your heroes in the game, like a lot of gurus, whatnot, and you interact with them over 20 years, you come to get to know them, a lot of the personal problems, a lot of the wins, a lot of the losses, a lot of the stuff publicly, and not much you don't see publicly. What happened to that business? What happened to that offer? You were doing so well here. What went wrong? Whatever. And I realized when I fell in love with direct response, it was this romantic notion that it's magic, it's powerful, it's great. And it is, but it comes with flaws like everything else. And so my maturity in the game and the development of my philosophical wisdom that I share with everybody came from looking at what's wrong with direct response. What's the limits? Why is it that like there's only $1 or $2 billion companies in our space? But yet at the same time, like if you go to Silicon Valley, there's like dozens and dozens, right? Why is it that most offers come up and go? Why is it that customers get burnt out? Why is FTC always involved in our industry? Why is there a notion of get rich quick? Why is the word scam circulating? Why is all these things? Why do people feel icky, especially women when they write copy? Because I work in Energy Plus. I did I think a series of 4 or 5 calls on just specifically selling to women. And I had a guy implement all that. And he went from what it took. I think he made more in 1 month than he made a whole year last year just by changing it. So that's like a lot of people, that's a gold standard in the industry of selling to women. And a lot of the women I work with, I try not to change their stuff to be more pushy.
Yeah.
They have this, you have to honor or respect their flow, how they express. And through this whole ordeal, I came up with this thing called push versus pull marketing, right? And push marketing is all about pushing people. Imagine you're standing behind a person and emotionally and psychologically, you're pushing them to go do a certain thing, buy this, you beat them up, right? So if you go on, for example, ClickBank, a lot of push marketing, a lot of fear. You're diabetic, you're going to lose your leg, passed out at the wedding, had a heart attack. It's just horrible, right? And what happens is like whenever you push against something, there's something pushing back. Otherwise, you wouldn't have to push. And I realized what really, if you look at good businesses, they have one commonality, which is repeat customers, repeat purchase.
Yeah.
And direct response doesn't seem to have much of that. because we tend to burn the customer out pretty quickly. And for example, if you look at Athletic Greens, they don't do any push marketing and they're worth over, I think it's like $1.5 billion now. Compare that to like health offers you see on ClickBank. I think all of them combined wouldn't be worth, you couldn't sell them for 100 million asset value. There's no way. And with the whole notion of push marketing, I came to realize it can be quite abusive, right? In terms of horror stories, psychological, then you get in the close and you're twisting and turning. It's like, why do you have to have a 30-page close? If somebody wants it, it just should be like, how much? Let me buy it.
Yeah.
So out of that bunch of this difference between push and pull marketing, then I also developed talk about competing on economics, and then inclusion versus exclusion and all these other principles came up. And then with pull marketing, much better, like people feel good and stuff, because the big thing now, and we can talk about this in a second, it's like where everything is going is money over time, right? What most people don't realize with direct response is that many copywriters, there's these shortcuts we have, right? Because copywriting, direct response is ultimately if you think about it, it's a shortcut. Like you're going direct to the consumer, you're putting something in front of them and generating an emotional response. They respond, they give you money, and that's it. And that culture of shortcut tends to push certain things, such as big idea in copy, etc. To me, big idea is, you'll see, for example, somebody have an offer and a copywriter will spend 2 months looking for the big idea. I'm like, if the product is right in front of you, why are you looking 2 months over there? And what they're looking for is like, how do we make this thing sound better than it is? Because in itself, it's not good enough. They create this big idea, big story, whatever, and somebody watching, it creates an expectation. Then they buy the product and they're met with disappointment. And what happens, what most people don't realize in direct response and business in general, once somebody buys the product or service, marketing doesn't work anymore. The product does the marketing. Therefore, and now it's these expectations, are they here and can this thing carry it? And this thing determines that they do business with you over and over again, right?
Totally. Yeah. I would say it's the transformation. Like now it's, can you fulfill on the promise? Can you deliver? Mm-hmm. And like you say, that becomes their benchmark of whether they want to give you more money or not.
Correct. Yeah. So the concept of a customer is a renewable financial resource. And we'll talk about, I'm just putting those down. Ratios of customers, pricing, there's a lot to unpack. If the customer doesn't buy again, then you don't have a business, because now you have to go back to Facebook or Google or whoever and constantly give them money you're constantly paying this inefficiency tax, right? In a sense. So we're constantly having to give a cut of the money to Facebook, a cut of the money to Google. Because in my philosophy, it doesn't matter what it costs to get the customer, because if you get them once and you can serve them for 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years, who cares what it costs here, right? Because you'll make it up. And that's the philosophy we operate by. And imagine, for example, a McDonald's opening, like any business in a city, anywhere in the world, and people just try it once. They would be out of business pretty quick.
Yes.
And then what happens with direct response, we constantly have to go get new customers and then run ads and eventually saturate the market. And then you don't have that's a psychological aspect of it. But then we lag the sociological aspect of it, which is your best marketing are your customers. And so if the product is bad, there's no way in hell they're going to go tell anybody to go buy it, because they're like, I just had this bad experience. I'm not going to put you through this. So then they don't tell anybody. And what happens is you don't create a feedback loop. Every business has to have a feedback loop. Every single business. And that feedback loop is that the social expression of this was so great or whatnot, and then it lags. And then in that whole ordeal, what ends up happening is that in direct response, we tend to punish our best customers. So for example, let's say 3% convert. Out of that, like 20, 25% buy the upsell or whatnot. And we're just squeezing more and more money out of less and less people. We're essentially taxing this group to cover this group who doesn't want to buy it. And then what ends up happening is, like, through this whole ordeal, most, not all, by the way, using push marketing, they make claims. And then eventually there's two things. Either the marketing model becomes extremely efficient, in which the product can't match that efficiency because it's made on promises, big claims, and FTC has to come in and regulate and all that stuff. Or it doesn't, and then it collapses. Long term, it doesn't work, and it has never worked. And that's why, if you look at in the history of our industry in direct response, there's not one offer that's been around for 10 years. And that's why. And so with women, back to that point, like pull marketing is much better, and we can talk about that. And that's a lot more intricate, understanding the customer ratios, how much they can afford, what the price, and all these things, and really respecting and honoring how things naturally evolve organically and working with that math instead of trying to break the natural cycle and the rhythm of the market,
Totally. Yeah. And I'll just put another plug in here for everybody listening to join Alan's free Facebook group, Nothing Held Back. We'll make sure that's in the show notes. You can follow Alen on Facebook, because you are like a very generous, and you've talked about a lot of these things for free. Like everything that you're mentioning and competing on economics and customer lifetime value and all these different things, like you've written whole posts about them. And I'm not going to make you repeat everything here. Of course, share what you want to, but I just really encourage people, if this is your first experience, your first introduction to Alen, like just go down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, I would encourage, if you guys do join the Facebook group, just search my name in the group and look at all my posts. I've written a lot. Right. There's a lot. And see what resonates with you, but they're all really good. And the reason I can share all that is because I have so much more, that a lot of experience, a lot of this stuff, it doesn't take away or the competitive advantage in other things. With these ratios in direct response, you can only penetrate about 1% of the market before the offer collapses, right? That's a rule of thumb. So the reason being is, if you look at the ads running, you got, I don't know, let's say, for example, you have a 5% CTR all on Facebook. That means like 5% of the total audience says yes, and then but 95% no. And so my approach to marketing is a little bit inverted backwards from everybody else. For example, with competing on economics, when I first came up in direct response, I mastered copywriting, right? I got really good at that. I can compete anybody in the world when it comes to copy. Like, I can bang out an offer in my sleep live. And I do in NHB Plus and Fast Forward often, just full on offers. But what I realized, like when we started running supplements and stuff like 2008, 9, 10, we had people that had like tiny pages, like size of a postcard, believe it or not. So here we are, we're writing these 20-page, 30-page web pages. You got to scroll by. Yeah. And there's these guys running these like pages are size of a postcard, making 100, 200, $300 million a year. And I was a big affiliate, like one of the biggest email marketers in the world. Because what I would do is I would buy a lot of data, and then we would mail the data and all sorts of stuff. And so you send an email and you're like, damn, this thing converts to 10%. And it kind of broke my marketing brain at the time, because I go, this shouldn't happen. You got to have all this copy. You got to do all these things for it to make money. This shouldn't happen. There's something wrong here. Sure enough, it was like 10% conversion rates. And I started looking at what's going on here. And I'm like, interesting, because with the copywriting world, they're focused on percentages, right? Yeah. And so psychology moves a percentage, which is basically a probability. And so it's correlation probability. That's what it really comes down to. So it moves a percentage, but a percentage of what? For example, if you have a $100 product, you'll convert it, let's say 1%, and then you knock it down to $5, you'll convert it like 8%, whatever, right?
Yeah.
10%.
Yeah.
So that percentage changes based on price. So there's something causing resistance, if this is the case in between, which is the in-between justification. And then I was like, what's the deal here? And so then I was like, oh, it doesn't matter what the percentages are. What matters is how much money you get out of a customer over a long period of time in order to offset the cost of advertising, acquiring the customer. And that way, that was the competing economics. But most people take it at face value on a surface level, which they think is just money. I'll give you an example. So especially the women's market, the less you charge in upsells, the more you will make. But there's a direct correlation between people buying upsell 1 and 2 and buying the back-end program. So if somebody buys a front end, they buy the bumps and they buy upsell 1, that means they're a triple buyer. And then there's triple commitment to buying the back end. So they ascend a lot. Now, if you have a high price point, that actually gets lower. So if you have a lower price point, that goes up. But we first have to define what economics are. And economics is the management and allocation of scarce resources. And so there's many scarce resources that your customers have, such as time, money, energy, knowledge, ability, and then trade-offs. And so when we're competing on like economics, the default assumption by many is nobody wants to buy this. Let's make them buy it. And then they go, heavy headline, heavy claim. My assumption is if somebody comes on this page, they 100% want to buy it. Yeah. But there's stuff that's preventing them from wanting to buy it. Let's figure out what's causing their resistance. What trade-offs are we asking, right? So for example, if you're selling biz op and business opportunity, one of the most common things most do is they'll have quit your job 9 to 5. Yeah. If you quit your job, that's very dangerous. And you can't ask somebody to quit their job, because they have to, that's safety and security. And so when they read that, they go, I have to quit my job to do this. It kills conversion, creates resistance. So I'm not trading off my job. You can do this while having your job. Oh, now it can increase. So that's where competing economics is. It's really knowing how to work with all the trade-offs and then make the trade-offs. And then for men and women, it's very different, because for women, the belief system is different structurally. Money carries more weight. And so for a woman, they're a lot more aware and cognizant of these trade-offs. And so if you ask, for example, with women, the pricing inflection points, meaning when the psychology on the page and the weight of the psychology and what you say changes, is like it goes at $1, $3, $30, $300, $3,000. For men, it's at $1, $10, $100, $1,000, $10,000. So that's why for men, if you're running a coaching program, whether you have a $5,000 program, $6,500 program, or $8,200 program, it doesn't really affect conversion as much because you're on that
same range.
Yeah, of the inflection point. But for women, if you go from 3,000 to 5,000, boom, it tanks a lot because now they're thinking for what else can I get with that? And that prevents that a lot.
Why do you think money is heavier for women?
Well, I haven't really talked about this publicly, even in the group. I did talk about it in Entry Plus and Fast Forward for some years now. But one of the things I really focus on is just deep psychology, because marketing, as we know it, is nothing more than change work, right? So like modern salesmanship in print, of course, salesmanship multiply, of course, but really it's change work. And the reason it's more so change work than salesmanship is because these days people don't like to buy. Actually, in fact, they like to buy, but they hate being sold to. Right. So people love to buy, they hate being sold to, meaning when they're being sold to, it takes away choice, right? When the choice is taken away, it really triggers a lot of alarms. And when it comes to change work, we have to know what allows us to change. And the first thing to looking at change work is beliefs, like belief systems. And so a lot of people talk about what a belief is, what it is, but not many people, I've actually never seen anybody in our industry ever specify what a belief is, how it works in the mind, what it does. And so what it is really, we have to look at a belief system is a safety system, right? Because our subconscious mind does everything to protect us. And so it's a safety system. And then what's a good safety system? The one that detects danger and difference, right? For example, if you have an alarm in your house, if somebody comes in, that's a difference. Somebody's walking, boom. If a window breaks, it goes off. Women's safety systems are a lot more sensitive than men's. And so there's 4 levels of, I don't know what to call them. Like I tame them like the core motivators of human drive. So the first is survival. Obviously, we have to live, right? The second one is reproduction. That's why sex sells, reproduction and all that. The third one is safety and security. And the fourth one is status. So both men and women equally carry survival, and they both carry reproduction in terms of drive. But where they differ is safety and security. So women respond to safety and security, and men cater to
status. Yeah.
And so everything that violates safety and security for women tends to be dangerous. For example, I had a client come to me selling to women. They had a wonderful program. It was like $3,000. Happy women, happy coming out, cheering, great culture, wonderful. Did that for years. And some guru was like, charge more, without completely not knowing any of these things exist. Yeah. And it was just the rhetoric, right? So it's like, charge more. So sure enough, they're like, let's go to 5,000. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't great. And then they went to 8,000, which is very far from the 3,000 inflection point.
Yeah.
But the program was like, I think like 10 or 12 weeks. And then at that price point, what happens? Women have a lot to juggle, right? And so the way women evaluate safety is different than men, because most evaluate safety through social interactions. Hence why they're more agreeable, more cohesive, more communal.
Yeah.
And they have more of a active social life, right? For guys, they can be hermits and work. For women, they like to have more balance. Anyway, so they raised the price to whatever. And then they started having women coming on these calls, like crying, stressed out, full of anxiety, panic attacks and stuff. And like, why? You made the emotional weight of money very high. And then you also boxed them in because they couldn't get that done in time. So the solution was like either extend your program to 20 to 24 weeks to give them runaway because things come up like holidays, social events, or lower the price. And that was it. And it was like, they were like, and they fixed the business right away.
Yeah. I love your study of human behavior. I think it's really fascinating and it's so refreshing because you just don't hear people talking a lot about it. And to me, it speaks to your level of mastery. And then, of course, how you've been so successful and why the people in your mastermind and stuff are so successful, because it's not just like, how do we shove this down someone's throat? It's more like, how do we really understand the person on the other side of this and what motivates them? And it's obviously just something that you enjoy. I think even if there wasn't any money being exchanged, like I just can't imagine a world where Alen isn't just observing and studying human behavior.
Yeah. A lot of it comes from my own mind too. Like just looking at my own brain and like, okay, what's going on in there? And reflecting, a lot of reflection, a lot of awareness. But yes, and once you start looking at beliefs as a safety system, it becomes so much easier to write copy and not to cause things that trip people up in the copy. Yeah.
And I love that.
I think women intuitively know that. And so the big difference is as far as push marketing, it's like push marketing tends to break all the beliefs, violates all the beliefs, whereas pull marketing tends to work with beliefs. So for example, I've had a post a few days ago that talked about, I can't remember exactly what the post title was, but it was like, people are convinced. There's 4 different convincers. And one is automatic, meaning you put it in front of somebody and they just believe you, right? They'll buy. That's about 5% of the population. That's why if you look at BSL conversion rates, it's like 1 to 3%. Then you have repeat, which is they need to see it multiple times. And then you have duration, which need to be to see something for a long period of time. And then you have never. But there's shortcuts to these processes to make the brain feel like it's got what it needs in order to feel safe. It goes back to feeling safe, because subconscious, what it does, its job is just primarily keep you safe. And if you ever like land on a page or talk to somebody or whatever, and you just have a weird gut feeling about it, that resistance, it knows something that you don't know.
Yeah.
That's the safety system. Hey, don't do it. Don't go do that.
Yeah. It reminds me, like, I'm trained in something called rapid resolution therapy, and there are like aspects of hypnosis to it. And a lot of it is like really working with subconscious mind, working with our internal safety and survival system, because a lot of the things that trip us up, right? Like anxiety, guilt, regret, all of that is like the way that mind is processing. It's like taking in some fresh information, and then it's like miscategorizing that as, oh, let's do something right now to change something in the past, or let's do something right now to change the future. And like one of the techniques that we use, you're basically just saying a bunch of, it's not really nonsense. It's just stuff that doesn't really matter, but that mind won't argue with. And so it lulls you into this hypnotic state, because it's like there's nothing that raises that alarm. And so after a while, after a few minutes of that, mind is, yeah, okay, I don't really need to pay good attention to this. It's fine. They're not saying anything I disagree with. And then you're in. And then you can reprogram things. But if you say even one thing, and it's an art, like it's a skill. If you say even one thing that causes a little bit of resistance, then it's, oh, mind is back online. There's a gatekeeper there, and the flag has been raised.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I did a training in Imagery Plus, and all these trainings are like 2 to 4 hours. Like I go super deep. But one was specifically on symbolic language. And I feel like this is one area most copywriters, marketers lack. And it's like everything you say symbolizes something else.
Yeah.
So there's like masculine, feminine, neutral, and all these things. But for example, I had somebody, and I love this guy. He's a phenomenal marketer. Love the guy. And he did this offer, and he had the way his bonuses were architected on his offer. And it was like, it wasn't aimed at marketers. His offer was aimed at like home repair services types. So a lot of the stuff I do isn't for marketing. I work on everything you can imagine. And he had this word bulletproof quite a bit in the page. And I go, we got to take this out. And he's like, why? And I'm like, because essentially, if we're talking about bulletproof, somebody's going to shoot them and want to kill them, right?
Right.
So, symbolically, it's not good. And so we took that out, and it made the offer feel and sound, the texture, much better. So this idea of symbolic language is very important, and what's communicated, how it's communicated.
Yeah.
Because the way the mind works is we have too much information in the environment. So what it has to do, it has to take it, package it. So it folds. Imagine like a piece of paper. It constantly folds. And then at the bottom of it, you have like symbolism, right? And that's why brands use symbols. So it's like Mercedes, Nike, whatever, Apple, because we look at the symbol, and the symbol can pack a lot of energy. But if you think about it, like mantra is a verbal symbol as well.
Yeah.
Right? And that's why they have the slogans. And so symbolic language tends to be quite important when it comes to tripping up the safety system in the mind. And now, like with the safety system, that's just the beginning of it. There's a lot of nuances in terms of understanding it, but it's a very delicate system, especially in women, because if you look at it from an evolutionary perspective, like if a woman gets pregnant, that means like 2-3 years high risk, right? Survival high risk.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot there. And so a lot more has to be in consideration in terms of management of resources.
Totally. You know, the people you see that have done something really successful or out of the box and are living a life that you find really interesting and inspiring. Do you ever wonder how they think, or what's going on behind the scenes, how they make their decisions? I know I do. I've invested lots of money, at this point to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars, to get access to people like this. Not because I want to copy paste what they're doing, but because I want to get to know how they think, what moves they're making behind the scenes. And of course, because we're energetic beings, first and foremost, their energy alters my energy for the positive. This is exactly what I do for you inside Soul Mission, my private podcast full of transmissions that cause you to feel inspired, expanded, and ready to take massive action that aligns with your dreams and goals. The only difference is that you don't have to invest hundreds of thousands to get it. In fact, you can binge for free for 3 days. Check the show notes to sign up, or DM me the word mission on Instagram to get the link and start letting my energy rub off on you. So you talked about people love to buy, but they don't like to be sold to. And I've heard you talk about hiding the sale before. And yeah, hiding the sales process. Can you speak more to that? Because I feel like I don't fully understand it. And I feel if I'm walking into Nordstrom's, like I wouldn't want them to hide the sales process. So why is it that in direct response, we maybe need to do that or should be doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you look at innovation in terms of direct response, innovation doesn't come often in direct response, every once in a while. And I innovated quite a bit. So I created the podcast VSL. So I was working with a gentleman in crypto, and he came to me and he had a webinar. He was stuck at about 100,000 a month for quite a while. And a lot of people tried to help him out. And some of them did really well. Some copywriters actually took him from 50 to 100. Got to give him credit where credit's due, but he was stuck at 100. And so what happens is with a webinar model in crypto, basically that if you're familiar with it, then it's what's coming. So it's ultimately, why do webinars stop working? I stand corrected. Webinars do work in certain circumstances where the stars align and you make them align, right? But in general, not as they used to. And so if you've been on like a webinar, I had this free thing, I'll share this with you, whatever. And then you show up and it's great. Boom, give me money. And it's like, you just met the tip of the iceberg. The rest of it, you got to pay for. So it's okay. That sucks. And so you do that a few times and you're like, I don't want to show up in a webinar anymore. I don't want to give you my 2 hours. It goes back to competing economics. I don't want to give you 2 hours of my time because you're not really going to give me anything for free. Your page is like 50 other pages I saw. Your pitch is everything I saw. Therefore, it's no thanks.
Yeah.
And so the guy had this amazing system in crypto, amazing. And I only work with people whose stuff works. And so his stuff worked really well. And basically, because you have to have a conviction. You have to have conviction. You have to be convinced it's going to work. But you can have the confidence before you can have effective copywriting. So it was like conviction, confidence, copywriting. And then copywriting writes itself because you're convinced you can convince everybody else. And so me and him, and I was mentoring his CMO at the time. And so I'm like, dude, I have no idea how this thing works. And we got to get him on Zoom. So just like this, we're on Zoom. It was like, I think like 7 p.m. because he was in Thailand. And we're just like, and he's sitting there walking me through, educating me, pitching me. And I have this feeling in me, and I pay attention to I'm very intuitive when it comes to marketing. It's funny because a lot of people are like, you're very logical. I'm like, explain it. From when I'm explaining, it's very logical, but a lot of it is very intuitive.
Yeah.
Because if I feel something, then the audience will feel that too. So a lot of marketing is, if you're writing, put yourself in a good state, euphoric state, and write, because the words will be different than if you don't feel good. And so it's, if you're happy, your copy will be happy. If you're sad, the copy will be sad. If you read Bukowski, you can tell when he was drinking quite a bit or when he had a good morning or a bad morning. Anyway, so I'm getting this feeling and I go, that's it. Right here, this is it. We're going to take this and package it into a podcast because it makes me want to buy it. I had the feeling. I was like, what do you mean? I'm like, just take exactly, because we're recording, take this exact thing, find somebody who's a little bit charismatic and go and pack it. So we did, and it went to make like 3 million a month. And so it was making, and then of course, to be fair, the crypto market changed. And when the crypto market changes, everything changes because the audience becomes a little pessimistic, right? So that stopped working, but the model worked, right? So why did it work? I looked at the crypto audience and basically where they all consume their content, various Joe Rogan and stuff like that, podcasts. So we matched that. And so they didn't know they were being sold to. And by the time the thing came up, they weren't waiting for the pitch. They were the one asking for it. Then another guy took it and did it in BizOp. And this is what I've been told, not by him, but the people that work with him, publish him or whatnot, that he made 7 million from it year one in the podcast. And then other people try to do it, and they didn't do so well. But the reason the other people didn't do so well is they couldn't capture this essence of doing it. They were just like, let's just copy it because obviously it's that. But with a podcast like this, it's a little bit rigid, but it's flexible. And you got to know where to be rigid, where to be flexible, and how to have that cadence to catch it.
Yeah.
That's why for a handful of guys, it made a shit ton of money, and for a handful of guys, it didn't. But the point is, basically, we can talk about what happens next in the industry, but the industry is, if you take the dynamics test, the industry is composed of mechanics. So the way it works is every single market begins as nothing. Crypto is nothing. Basically, it becomes nothing but possibility.
Yeah.
And so if you look at every single area where this transformation takes place, it's nothing, it's chaos. And then the creative folks come in, and like creative folks will basically are the ones that, are the brave ones. They'll go in and start it, and they'll make it good. They'll refine it, and they'll bring some type of stability to it. And then out of that stability, then the mechanics will go. Now it's stable because mechanics also have as a belief system, their safety thing is off. They're like, they don't want to risk. They want something proven. So if you look at most of the market, what they want is they want a formula, they want a system, they want a process, they want a template, whatever, right? Just let me just copy what you're doing. So it's guaranteed to me instead of, I don't want to figure it out. So mechanics, now the thing is the creatives, really good getting things to stability and making it work. but they're not that great as far as like doing boring stuff every day too. Do this. Because at some point, business becomes pretty boring, right? It's just same shit every day. Mechanics are like, they don't like this part because it's risky, but they'll gladly do the boring thing like forever. And so they create efficiencies. Real world example. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. So we have this place here called other side of the North Art District, right? Some years ago, it was like crack houses. It was a bad area, like trains running through, very industrial, right? Nobody wanted to live there. Artists came through, whatever, made it cool. A few restaurants popped up, bars. That was a cool place to be, like this really eclectic coffee shop. I used to work there like nights. I used to work like, go there 11, work till 4. And it was cool. And then it became stable. And then the developers are like, there's money here. And they apartments. And now it's cool, but it's not what it used to be. So same thing happens. And what happens in this whole ordeal as these mechanics come in and just do it, they overdo it. And now everybody knows what a webinar is. Everybody knows what book a call is. Everybody knows what this is. And ultimately, what ends up happening is that people buy for the mechanistic nature of the product, not the big idea or the marketing. And then the podcast VSL, the reason they made it work was mechanistic idea of the nature of the product could be articulated and demonstrated. Now, why is that different from Nordstrom? Because in Nordstrom, you can go touch stuff. You can touch it, you can try it on, you can experience it, right? So ultimately, in direct response, what we do is we're promising an experience and then delivering on it. But what's really interesting is that the way people buy, back to the safety system, is people need information to buy. So you got information, like you read a description, you listen to YouTube videos, whatever, Google review, Google stuff. And then you know what happens when you're looking for reviews on Google and stuff like that?
Yeah.
That's the experience part. And what most people don't realize is experience is part of information. And so experience, when it comes to marketing, then we figure out how do we transfer this experience into the product, into the marketing, right? So do we give them templates, checklists, etc. And why do people need experience? They need people to decide for them. And that's why we hide the sales process.
And do you feel like there's a certain price threshold where you start hiding the sales process? Because obviously with automatic clients and like with my ebook funnel where it's $5 out the gates, it's going to cost something. You're getting a digital book. And yes, there's a ton of copy. So if you want to know more of what you're getting, but it's like, nobody's hiding anything. You're clicking on an ad for a book and there's an opportunity above the fold to click the button and buy it. But it's such a low price point that maybe there's nothing to hide.
Yeah, typically when you peg the price, so we used to sell ebooks for like $100 back in the day. And then Amazon came up with Kindle and ebooks were now $7 to $10, $14. And customers are like, why am I paying $100 for your ebook when Kindle is like $10? Because the digital book was superior to a physical book, but not according to Amazon.
Yeah. And
so the price got pegged. But ultimately, it's tangibility and the pegged price. And so one of the things I did consciously when I developed the architect and developed the automatic clients model was making it more transparent. And that's why it gave it such durability, right? Because it doesn't hide it. Here's what it is. Let's go, whatever. Because the ad will do a lot of the curating for you. And so what happens is like when everybody's in the same sales process, the sales process becomes inefficient. So the tragedy of, again, what's wrong with direct response? How do you make it better? Everybody does the same thing. Then basically what happens is eventually stops working. And then we have these boom and bust cycles in marketing, right? Oh, everybody's making a ton of money with webinars. Nobody's making money with webinars. Everybody's making money with book call. Nobody's making money with book call. Then it's everybody's making money with coaching. Nobody's making money with coaching. And it's until somebody else figures it out because mechanics. And so they changes. And so the innovation is always in who hides the sales process better. So for example, direct mail sales letters weren't sales letters, they were letters. Infomercials weren't infomercials, they were commercials. Direct magalogs weren't magalogs, they were magazines you get in the mail. They just, did I order this? Where's school? I'll read this magazine, next thing you're buying a bunch of supplements. Sales weren't VSLs, they were videos. Like when we first started doing VSLs back in, so I didn't invent a VSL, but a guy I know, Keith Wellman, not Keith Baxter. Keith Wellman invented a VSL. And if you guys want to know the history of it, like if you go to YouTube and type in Keith Wellman video sales letter or video sales letter formula, you can see a video from 2009. He was the first to talk about it. A bit of a historian of the game. And I like to always make sure that the people that paved the path aren't forgotten. And so he did it and then I perfected it. What I started doing was using the hero's journey in the VSL. And I remember I had a buddy of mine, we were all on Skype. He knew Keith very well. He actually promoted Keith's product. And he's, dude, I'm making like, I can't remember. My memory is, there's so much in there, but it's like something like $20, $30, $40, $50 a click. For every click you send, you made like a ton of money.
Wow.
I have to do this because this guy was phenomenally smart at spotting opportunity.
Yeah.
And so come up with a name, whatever. I'm like, cool. And I came up with a name for him on the spot. And he was, okay, can you write it for me? I'm like, sure. So I wrote a VSL for him. I wrote the upsells. He literally recorded it, slapped it together the same evening, put it up online, mailed it, and woke up in the morning and it's ton of messages, like I think he made like $30,000 like overnight.
Wow.
And then I was like, we're looking at what, like 20, 30, 40, $50 a click we were making. Why?
Yeah, that's insane.
Nobody was familiar with the sales process. Becomes extremely powerful.
Yeah.
But as time went on and everybody started doing VSLs, the numbers went down quite a bit.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. I appreciate you going down that rabbit hole with me, because I'm like, man, I feel like I don't fully understand this concept, but yeah, I get it. So I'm curious, you talk about light money and heavy money. And when I heard you talk about that, I'm like nodding my head yes. And not for the customer, but like for you as the person who's selling a service. And I just want my audience to hear this, because it's true. Like, not all dollars are created equally. And this podcast is called The Joyous Path to Millions. So like, we want the light money. That's like the fun stuff.
Yeah. So typically speaking, and I work privately with people and they're great. And once in a while, you'll get somebody who's just a tough person to work with. And there's a bit of a paradox, right? So it's like you have two types of people, right? Like the people that are in motion and not in motion. The people that are in motion are quite easy to work with, right? So criteria of a client, they figure stuff out. They're going, so if you meet somebody and they're making like 10, 20 grand a month, maybe even whatever, 10, 20 is fine. They solved a lot of stuff, right? And a lot of the problems they solved are personal problems, right? Fear of money, fear of success, fear of failure, fear of ads, fear of this, being criticized out there. Big ones I see is somebody will say something negative on ads and they freak out. And what happens with light money versus heavy money, I feel like heavy money, you take on a lot of their problems, their limitations, their concerns, their fears, etc. And they just want the outcome, but they don't really care about the in-between. They don't care how the food's made. They just want the food.
Yeah.
And they just want you to give them the outcome. But ultimately, they have to participate in that creative process. And then ends up being like all the responsibilities on you. Instead of just paying you to help them with something, they also pay you to stress, pay you to worry. And ultimately, this is a silent deal. It's like they pay you to worry, pay you to stress. And ultimately, they won't take responsibility. So if it doesn't work, you're the problem. If it does work and you make them $1 million, that sucks for you now because you just handed somebody $1 million. So it's really hard to deal with those people. So what you have to do really is just have boundaries and have communication. Here's what I'm willing to do and not willing to do. And that's it. In between is the deal. But yeah, some money feels very heavy. You can't wait to get the project done. And some money feels very light. And then also scope creep is a really bad one. I feel like for a lot of women, I think that's mostly your audience, is they have a hard time saying no or stop when it comes to clients. So the client just keeps unloading and unloading and unloading.
Yep.
And you have to have that conversation, like the boundaries, because here, this is what we agree to. And my favorite phrase to use in those situations, like, that's a separate deal. I'd love to help you, but that's a separate deal. Here's how much that costs. And that's it. It's because ultimately it comes down to like self-worth. Because if you're a woman and you keep taking on work that's beyond the scope of initial agreement, you're devaluing your self-worth and self-esteem, because now you have to give more and more for the same amount of money. And that kind of trains a subconscious mind that I'm not good enough, whatever, constantly. And if it's an involuntary giving state, and so then it becomes a bit of a taking state. So it's a bit emotionally abusive. A lot of people push it.
For sure. For sure. I've seen you publicly write about things that show me like your spiritual or like more of the mystic side of you. And I'm just curious, I don't know, some things that people might dub as crazy that you believe in.
Oh, everything. Yeah. I'm not religious. I studied a lot of religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam. I study all of them, Buddhism, I don't subscribe to any one religion. I do believe in God. I do believe in a creator. And so I would say I'm very spiritual. I respect all religions, but I believe that our creator endowed us with creative abilities and power. And the question becomes just like, most of us don't know how they work because my superpower is like psychology, right? Human psychology, and like how to move people. I call it rearranging furniture, getting the mind and change things around. Oftentimes it's unconscious. And there's a lot of that takes place when it comes to spirituality, right? For example, the way you pray can affect you deeply, psychologically speaking, right? Because the way it works is if you pray and you're begging and seeking help, ultimately you're communicating to yourself that you're not good enough, that you can't achieve it, you don't deserve it. Some external force has to give it to you. You can't do it. Yes. So a lot of ways people pray. And if you look at like the hierarchy of money, typically poor people would pray like that instead of praying with gratitude, assuming stuff. I'm a huge fan of Nabil Goddard. I think his work is wonderful. Everybody should listen to him. But then out of this whole thing, there's processes and stuff in the mind that like I don't really publicly talk about. I do drop them here and there and people go, oh shit, so the orgasm wish was one.
Yeah.
And then many others I'll do privately in the mindset stuff in HB, and I can talk about that. But yeah, with the orgasm wish, it's if the belief systems are safety, survival, reproduction, safety, security, and status, the way women reproduce is through looking for safety and security. And that's matched by men who have the most status. Now, status isn't just measured in terms of money. Status, it means that there's a hierarchy above other men. So it's comparison, right? Status in terms of like height, income, money, capability, intelligence, whatever, right? It's a thing. So you combine all that, and then you have safety and security. And then men are basically competing on status to attract women. And underneath that, we have reproduction, right? And so the mind doesn't really know where it is. It's like this thing in like a black room. It cannot interact with reality. So the only interaction with reality is through our senses, right? And so you have the eyes, ears, the five senses. And so it basically synthesizes reality through the five senses. And then what happens is if something feels good, that's survival, right? So if you think about food, the food that tastes good, that feels good, typically is best for survival, like fatty food, whatever. Unfortunately, some of it's not healthy, but if you go back through an evolutionary perspective, that food would be quite good for us in terms of survival. Then if you look at reproduction, sex feels good for everybody, so everybody seeks it. And then safety and security, so people want to make money, save money, have shelter, right? And then status, and obviously responding to watches, cars, big houses, how they look, even how they dress. And so when a person is having an orgasm, like all those senses come together into one. And then if you visualize your goals, then you are attaching the goal to the feeling, the good feeling. And that hyper conditions the brain to seek more of it. So now what you're doing, instead of seeking, because biologically speaking, we will seek reproduction, orgasm to reproduce, the reproductive state. But if you have an orgasm and you can catch that moment, in French, it's called petite mort, the little death. If you can die and then reborn with a new vision. So if you can attach that feeling to visualizing your goal as if you already had it, then it attaches the feeling to that goal, and then it becomes the subconscious mind now, instead of seeking the orgasm, will seek the goal. And so you become a hyper activator. So Napoleon Hill in Think and Grow Rich, he had a few of these guys that had like sexual transmutation, but nobody talked about how to do it. And it was this very weird like chapters, here's how you do it. But it's like, how do you do it? And that's one of the ways you do it. And then you basically become a lot more driven to your goals. And that's why typically men that have higher testosterone levels are more goal-oriented and stuff like that. And then the brain will seek ways to achieve that goal. And because then it starts to, it can't tell the difference if the feeling came from that activity or the goal. And then it's okay, now I have the goal, then it supercharges that creative aspect of you.
Yeah. And it's like, all of a sudden the goal doesn't seem different and scary, right? Which is what creates that resistance, is like anything we don't know, mind tends to perceive as a threat. But but it's like unconscious mind can't tell whether something happened in the imagination or it actually happened. And so it's like you had that feeling, it was a good feeling. And now all of a sudden it's, oh yeah, that's safe. That's good. I want more of that. Yeah. I love it. Yeah. And it's like way more fun than writing your SMART goals down on a whiteboard and looking at it every day in your office.
You can have a whiteboard in a bedroom, right? And just let me take a break here. Write it down. Back to it.
Oh, goodness.
That might work.
It might work. We can test it and find out. But no, I super appreciate you coming on the show. I feel like we could talk for another 3 hours, but I want to respect your time here. I know it's your mom's birthday. It's actually my sister's birthday too.
We can talk about a few more things if you want. I think that might be important for the audience.
All right, let's do it.
Before we conclude it. But mostly, like, one of the big things I'm gearing up to do is tell people where things are going so they can be ready for it and like what to anticipate. I tend to do that often to help everybody prepare for our changes to come. I think that'd be a good note to leave off of. And
okay, let's hear it.
I think the other one would be a great one we can talk about. And this is something I privately shared and I didn't publicly share. There's so much of these. I haven't had time just working on this platform as far as sharing what works. But ultimately, I think this would be very important for women listening. And I think it'd be a great tool, psychology and self-help or whatever you want to call it. But one of the things I did years ago was like, I was working a lot, 18 hours a day, and I was very unhealthy when it comes to that, like just a lot of coffee, whatever, like a lot of power to push through. And every time we have to work as far as like resistance goes, every time we work hard at something, there's something resisting us. Something's not right. So the key is not to push harder. The key is to step back, reflect on what's wrong. So I took the Well Dynamics test, which helped me immensely. Like it made me realize where I'm good at. And I shared that with a lot of people in the NHB group and everybody loved it. It was fantastic. There's a number of these tests you can take. And so if you think about what you mentioned earlier, what the challenge that most women have when it comes to online this type of, I wouldn't say inadequacy, but a challenge of asking for money. So ultimately, if you think about what copywriting is, it's basically, like one can argue, it's arguing with people, right? It's arguments. So if you want to be really good at, for the copywriters listening in terms of closing, you should go read attorney books on closing arguments. They're wonderful. So there's these books where like it's just closing arguments for attorneys. And like those books are better than most copywriting books you'll ever read. And so in that case, copywriting is arguing, right? It's arguing for your position. And so is marketing. A lot of messaging that we create, like I call it messaging rather than copywriting because you can get different terms. It's arguments, right? And one of the things with an argument is that we have to look at, you're arguing for your position against other positions and stuff, right? And that's where women have a lot of friction. And most people too. And so in this arguments, the essence of an argument is conflict. And now here's where it is. Knowing your conflict management style is the key to being really good at copywriting and marketing. So I've been meaning to write a post. There's a test you can, I think it's called, if you Google conflict resolution style test, it's like from the government. It's a free test. Let me actually see if I can look it up here. Hold on a second. Government test. Yeah, it's called conflict styles assessment. So if you just go to Google, type in a conflict styles assessment.
I'm doing that right now too.
It's a US here. I'm going to send you a link here in this chat so you can share it. I think it's
we'll throw it into the show notes.
Yeah. And so one of the things that if you look at the results that come through, there's competing, avoiding, accommodating, compromising, collaborating, accommodating, acknowledging, all these things. So it's like with women, they like quite a few of them tend to be avoiding. Conflict. They like to avoid conflict. But when it comes to getting money out of people, and when it comes to closing sales, you have to be aware of your avoidance when it comes to conflict, because ultimately that's where a lot of the discomfort comes. And so then you can go into compromising, and then you can go into competing. And therefore it's like, it's healthier, right? To go from avoiding, I'm going to avoid asking for money. Because most women, like when it comes to, they wait for somebody to initiate the deal. Right? And then I'll take what I can get. They don't feel brave enough to say that. Some do. I know some women who have no issue with taking money, and I'm proud of them. But most don't. And then you got the compromise, like, I'll do this for this, about this. In the compromising, they tend to give more than they get. And there's competing, like I'll be competitive, right? So there's a test you can take. And I'm actually getting ready to write a big post in the group for everybody on how to look at these things. But because I work with a lot of copywriters and stuff like that. And so I can tell when I write copy, especially women and men, I can tell what style they use. And I'm like, the avoiding is, you can clearly see it in the copy. And I'm like, you're dancing around asking for money. And that really affects them. So I think that's a huge value add to everybody who watches this podcast. To really study how the conflict style.
I think that's so smart. And going back to what you said about how like a lot of what you notice is intuitive first and then justified with logic. And do you suggest to other folks ways to develop their own intuition and really tap into feeling how a word feels? This is the one that feels off. So that, because it seems like I think so much of the space really is like tactical and skill oriented. But to me, it seems like if you have the intuitive piece, then even if you can't justify it with logic, in a way, it doesn't really matter because you can feel what's off and correct it.
Yeah, energetics in copy and marketing are very big. Like I'll tell you a secret, like I did tell it, like not publicly, but I've tested this where I actually will write a post when I'm in like a not a great mood and engagement is, and then when I'm like, I'll delete it and rewrite it in a good mood. And so I only write anything I do, any email I write, anything I do, it has to come from me having good energy, like positive, very euphoric. The key to developing the intuition is to spend time alone and listen to your thoughts and your feelings. And not ask other people, like just leave it alone. Just let other people come later, but really just listen to your intuition and seeing what the feelings say. And I'm at the point where I can feel the market. I can feel markets, right? So I can tell if the market has pessimism, if they have optimism. For example, right now, our market has quite a bit of pessimism because Facebook Pixel is not working like as it used to. Like there's an oversupply of freelancers, 1 million copywriters, not enough people hiring them, all these things. So like a lot of the stuff I do is to inject more optimism to offset that pessimism. And then when there's a lot of optimism, I'll go pure skill set to lift them up, listening to knowing how to, where the audience is. But a lot of that comes from just silence, and trusting what comes out. Because typically the first thing that comes in the mind out of the subconscious is true. And then what the mind has a tendency to do is take it and then change it, mess with it. And then that's where a lot of the stuff. And then when we change it, then its true source and purity tends to be diluted. So the last thing I think we should probably touch on, I think it'd be of value, is like where things are going so everybody can know. And like I said, I talked about this I did a podcast with Jason. I don't know if he released it or not. And then I'm getting ready to write a big post. But I like to make predictions. And so far, every prediction I've made has come true. So if you look at my old posts, listen to what I said before about webinars, pixel economics, whatever, et cetera, where it's going. But as I mentioned before, whenever something starts, it tends to start off like disorganized and chaotic, right? Like neighborhoods, whatever. And then certain people, pioneers, they tend to come and make it stable. Like they create some type of stability. And then out of that stability, people who are mechanical nature tend to feel very comfortable and they just punch it. And the reason they can punch it is they can create these machines that are full of rules and processes and systems within corporate America, but on a smaller scale. And most of these folks do come from corporate America, and the name of their game is efficiency. They're very efficient. So efficiency and leverage, right? And so some years ago, back in 2010 or whatever, when we first did launches on ClickBank, right? We're doing a lot of launches. And like I mentioned before, you do a launch or two, you make a few $1 million and you're fine. And then a group of these guys came in, and they started launching and they're like, great. And it was nice. And then they were like, what if we launched twice as much? Then they made more money. Then the other guys were like, we should go launch twice as much too. They're making double the money. And then the other guys, well, it's 3 times as much. The process got proven, the stability, and so they launched more and more. And then the market just tanked. And so what I see happening now is more and more, everybody in the world wants to do this, right? More people getting activated. And I think it's a great thing. But what ends up happening is like distribution channels. You have Facebook, you have Google, you have, TikTok, Instagram, whatever. The audiences in those channels get exposed to the same messaging format, right? Hence the hiding the innovation and the hiding the sales process, creating innovation. And when they get exposed to the same thing, once they say no, it's not that so much they're saying no to your words or what you're saying. They're saying no to the format, interaction. And then that's when resistance arises in the marketplace. So before it would cost you like this much to book a call. Now it's this much. Now it's this much. That's whatever. And then out of that, basically, there's these mechanics. What they tend to do is they tend to increase the claims, right? And that's what's happening now. The claims are, so if you look at BizOp, it's like make $1 billion doing nothing, whatever. So when the audience becomes desensitized, and you can see this, by the way, like if you go on Twitter or like conspiracy theory guys, they're becoming more extreme in their nature. Yeah. And so in our space, it's the claims of make money or the guarantee claims. Everybody has seen it. We'll work for you for free until we die, like that. And the claims increase. And then ultimately, what is the audience resists that. So where it's going to be all money over time, right? Because if you look at any mature industry and banks or whatnot, the way the banks used to sell a house was you would give 50% of the house up front. You had 5 years to pay the other half off, and that's it. And not many people are buying houses. Right. And then banks invented a mortgage. And so it goes back to competing economics and ecology. We forgot to talk about ratios. If you want to talk about ratios, whatever, the income ratios. But in income ratios, you can only get 10% of their annual income before they develop anxiety and panic attacks or whatnot. Right. So, renewable, right? If you go over 10%, 20%, that's when they mentally collapse or whatnot. But anyways, it's money over time, and catalog models are going to be big. And that's one of the things I teach a lot. So having a bunch of products in the pipeline to promote to basically offset that. So if you look at direct mail, I spoke about this on other podcasts, but there's like there's direct mail, there's the infomercial, there's different paths, right? Yeah. With direct mail, they operate on secondary or tertiary transactions. So they don't break even until the second or third transaction, right? Yeah. So it's true, those that can spend the most will acquire the customer. But in the future, those that can go negative the most to acquire the customer and then offset it through a catalog model will win. And so it's moving over into money over time models. That's right there. Yeah. So when you say money over time models, you're basically saying who can take the amount of money that you would need to receive, right? Like the bank getting 50% of the home price over 5 years and basically stretch that money out over time. Is that what you mean by money over time? You basically have to look at your customer's renewable financial resource, right? And so in that model, you're not competing with let's say you're a coach, you're not competing with other coaches. That's the least of your concerns, right? You're competing with the grocery store. You're competing with the car payment. You're competing with health insurance, right? And so they ultimately fundamentally have a limited amount of money to spend called disposable income, right? Yeah. So it's all businesses operate beyond utilities on disposable income. And so knowing how much disposable income they have determines how much we can ask for, right? Now, of course, they go on credit. And when you're in BizOp, the rules tend to change because give me $10, I'll give you 1,000 type of thing. But in essence, there's only so much you can get out of them at once. Yeah. And so you have to spread it over time. Yes. And then that's where the product becomes really important because remember what I said in the beginning, it's like as soon as they buy the product, marketing stops working. And there's this thing, we don't have time to talk about trust cycles, like how do you develop trust cycles and stuff like that. I talk about that in NHG Plus, but it's like how to develop trust cycles to rebuild trust, to keep going again and whatnot. But ultimately then what ends up happening is you got to go multi-transactions over time. And so whoever can go deeper in time
Yeah.
But with the NHB platform, we're architecting our economics to go negative for 1 year. And that's a long time. That way, the deeper you can go into time, the wider you can absorb and get the relationships.
Yeah. It makes sense. One of my businesses is an Amazon marketing agency. And I remember, I'm not super involved with it now, but when I was, we were talking to a company that sold some sort of nutrition bars, and we've got a bunch of software so we can see a lot of the back end economics, right, of any brand on there. And Quest nutrition bars, they were losing a ton of money. They were on their advertising on Amazon, but their thought was, we acquire the customer, right? If they like our protein bars, the first order is not the last order. And probably 2 or 3 months after I looked at that data for a different company, Quest sold for $1 billion. You're like, there you go. But obviously not everybody has deep pockets and they can't ride that out.
Yeah, every industry that matures tends to go money over time. Every single one. Mortgages, cars, everything. And the thing that allows every other industry to have money over time are credit cards. And so you can start correlating all these things. But the big thing that I focus on teaching is like catalog model, which is wonderful because for a lot of coaches, it frees them up from having the grind of always showing up. So we teach a lot of the and there are specific nuances to the catalog model, such as how you position it, what the next product should be, because ultimately it works on MLTVs. And I talked about this 3 years ago. People have this concept of lifetime value of a customer, right? But what most don't realize is the lifetime value of the customer has a limit, and that limit is by the maximum lifetime value of a customer. So what I think everybody should do in business is if somebody comes to you and say, hey, I want to buy everything you have, how much? They should be able to cut you a check for $1 million. That's wonderful if you can have that. And people are like, how do I do that? I don't know, charge $100,000 to build them something and coach for a year and whatever. People will pay. Have something for this, have something, all that stuff. And then we didn't talk about that, the inclusion versus exclusion marketing. That's a whole different thing, which is wonderful. But have the MLTV, and the higher your MLTV is, just by the virtue of having it and asking for a sale, you will make more money, like the MLTV. And then you take the MLTV, whatever, $100,000, minimum of $100,000.
Yeah.
And then you plot it over 12 months and you go, this week I'm going to sell them. This week I'm going to give them some content value. This week I'm going to sell them something. These 2 weeks I'm going to give them a little freebies. And then you just have this journey. I had a guy come to me with the guitar in the guitar space. Yeah, it's interesting because like a lot of them just come to me when it doesn't work. And then when they make a lot of money, they're traveling and having fun. Yeah. And then they come back to me to fix it. I haven't heard from him in some time. He had his guitar thing and he went through the coaching thing. And I'm like, nah, let's just do it. We did a catalog model. And I think it's like most of his profit, like 80, 90% of profit is like made in the catalog model now. So he just runs ads on YouTube and Google, gets the course and then hits it, sells them. And it's wonderful. It just makes money. Doesn't have to do coaching, doesn't have to do anything. It's great.
Yeah. That's the direction that I'm going in my business too. Catalog. And it's, like digital products, they're evergreen, they're phenomenal. You can just pour your heart and soul into making them really great because then you don't have to show up and deliver it later. And it works well with my personality because I won't watch the same movie more than once. I don't like doing anything more than once. So it's once I say it, then I want to be like on to the next thing. And so the catalog model works great for that.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's wonderful. There's another guy. He was in the biz ops space. Like I'm not going to mention them, but his ads are all over Facebook. He's in my program too. And he basically wanted to sell the business because like he thought the only thing he could do was coaching. And I'm like, nah. So we built a catalog model. He gets 24 products in there now. Yeah. And I'm not selling this thing. It's good. He just travels with his family and he just keeps making the money. And I get his emails. Hey, do this, buy this, whatever. And people are buying it. Yeah. It says, but what's wonderful about this model too is if you have the catalog model, then the more times they buy, it goes back to that convincer, right? The reputation, the more trust you have, and then the more likely they are to go to coaching. So you don't have to give up coaching and consulting. You can have it as a layer, and then that allows for money over time. And then you become a lot more competitive. So you'll never have to stress about, oh man, I'm losing half my money on Facebook this week on this thing. That's okay. It'll come back in 2 weeks, and then after it's profit. I have a guy I work with. They do the money over time model as well, and they're in the finance space. They sell like things like they sell a thing and they lose like $100 up front, like day one. Once they just lose $100 and they make 300 in 3 weeks and they're doing like 5 million a year. And it's easy once you're not afraid of the math. It's all math. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Obviously, we'll link to your Facebook, to the free Facebook group. We'll link to the conflict styles assessment in the show notes. What else? If you, like you say, you're never selling anything, which is ironic and hilarious thing in your free Facebook group because everyone's just
selling your stuff on your behalf. But do you want to pitch anything? I know you're working on this new platform. Is it something where people are going to be able to join? Are they going to be able to pay you? What do you want people to do?
Yeah, we wanted to create a special place for marketers where it was everybody helps everybody. So we built this wonderful platform. It's free. The base is free. We have levels where people can upgrade, but foundationally it's free. Yeah. So if you go to nothingheld.com, you can get on the wait list, go in the group, look at stuff, read it, get value. And then if there's any interest in coming to our higher level programs, then explore and then reach out. It's funny because we don't have anywhere like this publicly. You can't publicly join them anywhere. There's no find and join. So people have to oftentimes ask and reach out and stuff like that. And I think keeps it healthier for everybody. It keeps us in our integrity. I think that's really important because no pitching.
Yeah.
I think linking to the Wealth Dynamics test would be really good for people too. And if you guys, I think Wealth Dynamics tends to offer coupons and stuff like that. It's $100. Okay. So if you go to Google and type in, I don't know, if you go in the group, Wealth Dynamics test is really good. Another thing I think it's really good for everybody. It has nothing to do with psychology, but biology. There's one of the biggest things that I shared in the group too was genetic testing. So I had genetic testing done using 23andMe. You download your data for 23andMe and you upload it to this thing called Genetic Genie.
Okay.
And it'll tell you your genetic mutations. And then you can basically take those and put them into ChatGPT and ask what vitamins and stuff to take. But again, not a doctor. So talk to your doctor about all this stuff, disclaimer. But that has helped me a lot because I have personally an NPHFR mutation and my body can't synthesize folate. So I have to I have to take a specific, because without folate, you gain great serotonin. So it can lead to depression. And I think for a lot of people have it. So when I shared that in the group, a bunch of people took their DNA tests and the feedback I got was ridiculous. It was man, you changed my life. I have energy. Wow. I can wake up. I'm not tired. I have clarity. I'm not depressed. All these things.
Wow.
So that would be really good too. Yeah. So there's plenty. And we didn't talk about inclusion versus inclusion marketing, but I think it's in the Facebook group somewhere. We talked about that.
I think it is too.
That'd be good value. So thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Dude, thank you. I've learned so much from you. Your generosity, I think, speaks for itself. And I know that everyone listening got a ton of value from this. So appreciate you so much. And to everyone listening, thank you so much for tuning in.
Thank you.
I know that you absolutely loved that podcast episode. And I can't even just distill it down to 5 takeaways. I think there was so much goodness there that really is beyond, hey, here are the 5 things to think about. But for me, one of the top ones is really fall in love with the game. Go deep. You can hear it and experience it in talking with Alen that he's not just surface level. He's going deep into human psychology. Why is it? Why do I feel this way? Why do other people feel this way? I wonder what my conflict style is. Wow, has anyone considered reading books about closing arguments with lawyers? There's just a depth of mastery that only comes from truly falling in love with the game and truly wanting to master your craft and having a natural curiosity and letting the journey take you. And so if you take nothing else away from this podcast, I would really encourage that. And after we stopped recording, Alen and I chatted a little bit more, and it's really fascinating because it's the people who care so much about their work and the integrity of what they do, I find tend to be averse to direct response style sales and marketing that would really allow them to have this exponential impact. And then you see the people that are just very interested in direct response style marketing, where it's, I don't care what the offer is, just teach me how to do it so I can sell all the things to all the people. Those are the people that you really don't want having the skills because the offer may lack substance or may lack integrity. And so I guess the other thing I want to say is that I know those of you listening are meant to have a big impact on the world. And you care a lot about your work. You care a lot about mastering your craft. And if you're not considering how to sell and market so that it reaches the masses, you're really doing a disservice to all of the people who need what you offer, because those people are then clicking on ads and buying something that's probably not as good as what you have, but they've committed to learning that skill set. So I highly encourage you to spend some time and energy and money learning the craft of sales and marketing, and do it in a way that's authentic to you. You don't have to copy and paste what someone else is doing, but get good at that so that you truly can amplify the good work that you're already doing. So thank you, as always, for tuning in. If you loved this episode, share it with someone. You can screenshot it. You can tag me. I'm on Instagram at mmakesmoney. You can tag Alen Sultanic. I don't think he's on Instagram. I think he's just on Facebook. But share this episode. That would mean the world. This is a top 2% global podcast. And the only reason for that is because you tune in and listen, you subscribe, you leave reviews, and you share it with other people who could benefit. So thank you so much, and I'll talk to you soon. Thank you so much for listening to today's show. Changing the way that we think, feel, and talk about money is up-leveling the planet. I truly believe that. The ripple effect starts with you tuning in, and it spreads when you share this show on Instagram and Facebook. You can tag me at mmakesmoney. And you know what moves the needle the most? Taking just a minute to leave a 5-star review on iTunes. This show isn't free to produce, so let's multiply those dollars invested and help this show reach a bigger audience each week. So thank you in advance for your help. I really appreciate it. And until next time, I'm sending you all the magic money vibes on your joyous path to millions.